All right, you guys, I am back on today with ALAN ARAGON. Today is a more condensed episode as requested. So he is here offering his time to answer our questions again. ALAN, thank you so much for coming back on today.
It is such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. Right back, Pam. I love our conversations. I absolutely love them.
Well, I'm happy you do. There was a little mix up in times. So we finally made it. This is our attempt number 3. So this is going to be an amazing, amazing show.
It's momentous.
Yes. So if you guys don't know who ALAN is by now, I will post everything up in here. He's a nutrition researcher. I would say an exercise researcher as well. He is my go-to and many of your go-to for, at least if he's not, he will be your go-to for all nutrition questions and the real science-backed stuff. Because there's lots and lots of things that happen on the internet that we need to read through the lines. So ALAN's your guy.
Love it.
So that's actually kind of where I wanted to get started. So I have all of these notes. Again, I'm going to try to make this episode as quick as possible with some information for you guys. The thing that I wanted to get to was just that. I wanted to have you on and kind of talk about, you've posted a couple of times about like science versus pseudoscience. And I really wanted to get to read behind the headlines. And I had approached you and I said, we should totally talk about this because my position in the internet fitness space, I've been kind of exclusively online for, 8 years in my own fitness business. It's really hard to, even myself as a fitness professional, to know right away what's like worth reading into and how to read things. And that's kind of literally one of your positions, right? Is to help read the studies and help break that down. So I wanted to kind of, maybe if you can dumb it down enough for us to understand how to read behind, like in between the headlines, how to spot a kind of a red flag post, or maybe if there's some things that we could look for, if possible, of kind of just to kind of brush those things off. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's 2 overarching questions you want to ask yourself when a headline floats across your desk, or when somebody like shoves a research study in your face and say, oh, look what happened to these people. They got this disease from this food or whatever it is. The 2 main questions you ask are, number 1, how relevant is this study to my interests, or how relevant is it to the topic at hand? So you're asking about relevance. And then the second question is, how does this study fit within the backdrop of the existing evidence at large? So those are the 2 questions. How relevant is it? And then number 2, how does it stack up against the current weight of the evidence? So the asking whether it's relevant question really involves kind of looking at who was studied.
Okay.
So look at the population that was studied. Was it humans that were studied, or was it some sort of rodent model? And whenever you look at non-human data, then you have to sort of raise your caution levels a bit, raise your skepticism up a bit, because if there's human research on a topic already, then there's really no reason to go worrying about what happened in rodents on the particular thing. Like, I'll just give you an example. Most diet research, macronutrient research, carb and fat research, and even protein research that's done on rodents, kind of irrelevant, because we've studied the hell out of protein, carbs, and fat in humans for a wide range of clinical and non-clinical endpoints. And there's no reason to go focusing and wasting your time and energy on rodent research on protein, carbs, or fat. So that's one thing.
Yeah,
and another thing. No, I'm sorry.
I said no, that makes sense as to kind of kind of what's being studied. So for somebody that, I know you don't lose that thought, but for somebody that's kind of looking at a study, how would you? I mean, how, because there's, they have catchy headlines and they have these big bold headlines and like, this is going to cause cancer or, whatever, how would you be able to look at that quickly and know? Like, or can you not? Is that not possible?
Yeah. Oh man, no, I laugh because the answer to that question is 3 hours. But here we go. I'm going to do this. So
Less than 3 hours.
so you basically you look at who was studied. Now, if it's humans, you kind of dig deeper and go, all right, are these humans in a state of disease or are they healthy humans? Are these humans lean or are they overfat or overweight? Are these humans sedentary general population or are they lean athletic people?
Sure.
That matters. The profile of the subjects that were studied, that totally matters because the results of the study can either be totally irrelevant to you. Let's say that we're studying cancer patients, or we're studying postmenopausal women, and you're a 20-year-old bro.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
look at the population. Is it even relevant to your interests, or is it even relevant to the question? And then you have to look at the protocol that was involved. What did they put those subjects through? What were the doses? Are the doses even relevant to you? Like, for example, if we're looking at a training study or even a study that combines nutrition and training, are they looking at subjects who are completely untrained, people straight off the couch for whom almost anything will work? Or are we looking at trained subjects? Are we looking at highly trained subjects, athletic subjects? If you are somebody who's been training for a while, and then somebody floats a research study at you that looked at totally sedentary folks who were just plopped into a research study, the results might not be relevant to you.
Yeah.
And that applies to nutrition stuff too. Like, for example, you can take a group of people who've never trained in their lives, and you can do some sort of a test, like a resistance training protocol that either involves, let's say, high volume or low volume. And let's imagine there's no difference between the high volume and low volume, but you used freaking untrained as hell subjects.
Yeah.
Then this study is probably not relevant to you if you've been training progressively and consistently for a number of years. And so you have to look at things like that. And then, okay, so that's the relevance piece of it. Okay.
Sure.
Like, who's being studied? What's the protocol? Is it even relevant? Okay. That's part one. And then the second thing you have to ask, how does the study fit in with the rest of the available evidence, with the weight, the preponderance of the evidence? Because sometimes a study will be very interesting, but it is not corroborated by any other study in existence. Sometimes you get these one-hit wonder studies that spit out these really interesting results, but the results happened by accident. And
Sure.
that doesn't do you any good. You can't hang your hat on that particular study. So knowing what the weight of the evidence is, that's kind of a whole freaking art and science. And then you have to learn how to do a proper literature search. And it's not just the typical layperson, just Google it type of thing.
Yeah.
Because somebody who's not trained in doing a scientific search, they'll do a Google search on a question. And what pops up is, like, Google searches are ranked by relevance or number of accesses. And it's typically not the most accurate or scientifically rigorous results that you'll see at the top of a Google search. And getting to learn how to become good at those kind of searches, that's a whole other conversation. But
Yeah.
one little hack that your audience can do is just literally put the word PubMed or PubMed Central. Okay, so PubMed Central is a repository of full text articles, like
So give you
free
like
access
snippets.
articles.
Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Mhm.
PubMed will give you the abstracts, and it'll also include some full text stuff. But if you want to limit your search to the full text stuff, then you go PubMed Central. But just to make it easier, just literally include the word PubMed with
Mhm.
your Google search, and that will at least narrow the search down to higher quality literature that's in the peer reviewed that's within the peer reviewed databases. So that can save people a lot of time and heartache and BS, frankly, if you
Yeah.
just include the word PubMed with your literature search. And if you're the type to want to read a whole freaking scientific article, then you can attach PubMed Central to whatever question you pop into Google, and
Yeah.
then you'll get free full text. Okay, so here's the other thing that's a little bit difficult about this, and why we would need like a whole other conversation for it. You have to be aware of the type of study you're looking at. So
Yeah.
if somebody says, "Hey, Alan, this study says doing this causes this," then you have to ask yourself, okay, what kind of study is this? Is this an observational study? Is it an actual intervention type of study where they ran two groups
Yeah.
and investigated some sort of causal relationship? And then another important question, is this a short-term response study where they're looking at the effects of something over a few hours or within a 24-hour period? Or is it a longitudinal study where they're looking at the effects of a chronic exposure of some sort of protocol or some sort of agent over a period of weeks or months? So, as you can imagine, the longer term studies, the longitudinal studies, hold a little bit more weight than the short term response studies.
Sure.
And so, if you've got a bunch of short term studies showing one thing, but you have a bunch of longer term studies showing another thing, then you take the short term stuff with a grain of salt. I'll give you an example there. For in the dieting world, intermittent fasting, and within that, we got time restricted feeding.
Yeah.
And within time restricted feeding, we have early time restricted feeding, where you limit your feeding window to the earlier part of the day, or we have delayed time restricted feeding, where, for example, you're skipping breakfast and or lunch and you're eating your
Yeah.
stuff
Yeah.
later. Okay. So the short-term research that's just, within 12 hours, 24 hours or so, it consistently shows better or more favorable clinical effects with early time restricted feeding. So it shows better glucose control with early time restricted feeding compared to conventional non-time restricted feeding or delayed time restricted feeding. Okay,
Mhm.
so that has led a lot of people to conclude, oh crap, we have to stop eating at 5 p.m. Pacific time if we want to be healthy, which is a
Oh,
load
yeah.
of bull crap. But a lot of people latch onto that. A lot of
Yeah.
people think, oh crap, I got to make sure I'm done eating by 6 p.m. Otherwise, I'm not going to get my longevities, baby, please,
Yeah,
which
and
is
that's
a
people hang on to that because that's like
Mhm.
even an old thing for when I remember when I first started paying attention to nutrition ages ago, that was, oh, stop eating at 6 p.m. and your whole life will be changed. It's going to be better because if you stop eating at 6 p.m., all your problems are solved. And so I can see that's kind of where they would latch on to that. So that was actually a good question that you just answered that somebody was asking in regards to intermittent fasting was, is it better or more beneficial if you put your window earlier or if you put your window later for those that like to intermittent fast?
I'm glad that that question was asked, because the answer is short-term studies, like within day studies, show better glucose control with early time restricted feeding compared to delayed time restricted feeding or conventional eating from morning to night type eating.
Yeah.
But when you draw the experiment out beyond the short term, it doesn't freaking matter. As
Okay.
long as, you're comparing two groups that are running the same deficit, by the end of the day, by the end of the week, the clinical parameters, blood glucose, blood lipids, etc., and body composition, they both improve equally.
It's the
So
same.
the freaking answer is do what you actually prefer and can stick to. Some people will prefer early time restricted feeding. Great, do that. Some people will prefer later time restricted feeding. Great, do that. Some people will prefer eating throughout the day from morning to night. Great, do that. If you're focusing on the placement of the eating window, and also if you're focusing on the length of the eating window, you're missing the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
You're focusing on the little pebbles or even the little grains of sand, and you're missing the big rocks. So the big rocks are, make sure that by the end of the day you have hit or at least been within the ballpark of your nutrient and calorie targets
Yeah.
with
Consistently.
a reasonable and healthy food selection.
Hmm.
And that's the forest that you need to focus on. And you can simply just individualize and personalize how you get that done. You don't have to stick to a certain when you eating window or certain length eating window. All of that stuff is just neurotic baloney.
And the only time that would be really beneficial, like you said, is kind of how somebody wants to create their habits and what works for them. So if that
Yeah.
16-8 window is working for them because it helps them stay in that calorie range that they need to stay in, whether it's in the morning or in the evening, and it kind of gives them those kind of rules that they may want, as long as they stick to it, it's fine. That's the
A-
force.
Absolutely. You will live just as long as the person who is early time restricted feeding to perfection. I mean,
Yeah.
dude, their eating window is so narrow, it's so early. You will live just as long, and you'll probably be a lot happier than them.
So you might enjoy your life a little bit more.
You'll enjoy your life a little bit more as long as you're physically active. You're either maintaining or pursuing a favorable body composition,
Hmm.
and your overall food choices in the course of the day. Your overall diet has a good selection, healthy selection of food choices for the most part. I mean, you don't have to go for perfection, but I'm
Yeah.
talking the majority of your diet is whole and minimally refined types of foods. And there's
Sure.
exceptions there. Protein powder is refined and processed and stuff, but it still shows beneficial effects. But
Yeah.
yeah, those are the big things people need to focus on. And then you customize how you get it in
Yeah.
and when
Yeah.
you get it in.
Yeah, and I think everybody probably listening to this, either they just found it, but most people are are searching this information, probably do understand your message of kind of general whole foods. I have your little book back here. It's Flexible Dieting, you guys. He wrote that. But it's got a lot of the
Yeah.
information we're going to talk about in here. But they do, we kind of, I guess we can just assume that we know that we should be eating whole foods for the most part, just within, but we don't have to major in the minors as far as making sure that we can, if we want to fast we can, if we don't want to we don't have to. So there's no real long scientific evidence that suggests we should be
No,
eating.
no, no,
Okay.
it's
Yeah.
all speculation. It's all a lot of it is BS, honestly.
Yeah.
And people a lot of times they read too much internet lore for their own good.
Yeah.
Like some people will say, "Oh, you got to fast. You got to make sure you fast like do a 3-day fast regularly to make sure that you regenerate your toxic cells and all
Autophagy.
this baloney." Yeah,
Getting
yeah,
into
you got to make sure you elevate your autophagy. If you don't fast for at least 16 hours per every 24-hour cycle, you're not going to raise your autophagy. That's a whole load of baloney, honestly. And when we look at autophagy, chasing autophagy as a primary objective, it doesn't make sense. Autophagy is this physiological algorithm that happens. It ebbs and flows with
Yeah.
with fasting and feeding. It ebbs and flows with exercise. Exercise is a great way to spike autophagy.
Yeah.
Resistance training elevates autophagy. Endurance training elevates autophagy. The thing about like chasing autophagy with fasting is it can be a win-lose.
Hmm.
Whereas with exercise, it's usually always a win-win, because when you chase autophagy with fasting, then you risk things like excessive losses in lean body mass. Um, you risk not having an optimal level of nutrient intake. You also can risk not being optimally hydrated.
Yeah.
But the big picture is worrying about things like autophagy is like worrying about chasing elevations in glucagon.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, raise your glucagon levels. It's gonna happen. It's gonna ebb and flow with a healthy diet and a healthy lifestyle. Focus on getting your body composition right. How about that?
Yeah.
Focus on making sure your diet overall is high quality. How about that?
Hmm.
Focus on staying physically active. Focus on staying psychologically well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Autophagy on the ranking of things to chase for health doesn't even make the top 1,000, frankly, if you were to
Yeah.
put a list together. But
Yeah.
hey, it sounds cool. It's a cool buzzword. And sometimes people just want to feel like they found the magic bit of knowledge.
Yeah. They do.
Sorry, autophagy ain't it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think kind of majoring in the minors and really, really, like you said, just trying to maybe justify why they're not where they are because they didn't chase the autophagy enough. And and I think that people are always looking for that missing thing that they might be missing. Whatever it is, whether it's misinformation or maybe they just are in a tough spot and they just mentally um can't get their brain around kind of adjusting their calories or what have you. They want to chase that one thing that might just push them over the edge. But really, it's like you said, it's kind of consistently getting in those basic habits, brilliant at the basics. I love to say that. And not worrying about the buzzwords, but I mean, they do sound cool because when you start talking about fitness and nutrition for so long, I feel like people might that are like trying to get more attention, maybe get a little bit bored saying the same thing. So they gotta say something new and they gotta talk about autophagy. And then people might latch on to that kind of stuff. So I guess that's a really big part of the conversation that I wanted to have today was to kind of clear up some of the noise, at least for some of the people that are out there searching for that correct body composition that they're looking for, because it does get a little bit hard to read,
For sure, for
you
sure.
know?
And like it's this is not a very scientific thing to do, but when you read the interviews of people who've lived the longest,
Hmm.
like I'm talking world record holders in just lifespan,
Yeah.
these people who've lived to, beyond 100 years old, and you ask them, oh, what's the secret? What's the secret? There's this one like world record holder, the longest living woman, and they asked her, so what is the secret to your long life? You know what she said?
Mhm.
Chocolate and young men.
Super scientific. I'm gonna latch onto that one.
I just wanted to drop a gem for your audience and maybe for you if
I'm gonna put
you
that as
know.
a sound bite. We're gonna put that one up, and then people are gonna latch onto that one. Alan Aragon said.
Oh, you're gonna get me canceled, girl.
No, no, no. We're going to bring you more people, and they're just
All
going to
right.
love it. uh, but I think that part of it would just be like you kind of said, was just to make sure that you are mentally healthy and happy, and you have that community aspect of it, and you're not stressing out about everything, because we stress out about so many things that we probably don't need to stress out about. And that again is one of the reasons I love to have you on and to follow your information, because you say things very kindly and you butts miss kindly, but it's just a way to say, hey, just relax, like it's going to be okay. Like we don't have to search for the next magic bullet. And I guess that's kind of what I really wanted to kind of bring to the table for that. So we kind of wanted to know how to read and understand studies, and I know that's a really in-depth conversation because
Mhm.
for somebody like myself that is not a professional at looking at those things, and I would much rather have the bullet points, and for somebody to tell me I'm the majority of people when it comes to that. It is hard to start to be able to read that kind of thing, but at least
Mm.
we can kind of tear down some of the red flags. So basically, like you said, make sure that the studies are done on humans and try to look at the longer studies versus the short-term ones. So when I had a question about, before we move on to the next subject, was the one that was kind of recent. Of course, it's kind of dear to me a little bit because I work with cardiac patients, was the heart health one about if protein, what was the headline? I know you know what I'm talking about. I've heard you
Yeah,
talk about it.
I know
Yeah,
exactly what you're
protein
talking about.
was bad for cardiovascular health. Um,
Right. Yeah.
because we do, in my clinic, we do teach nutrition, and I do at least make sure that they understand the protein conversation. We get it from all sources in there. We get it from meats and plants and all that stuff. But I had that question actually brought up to me about, well, I heard too much protein was going to make me, at a higher risk for what I already went through. So can you kind of clear that up? Because I know I heard you talk
Absolutely.
about it. Mhm.
Yeah, for sure, sure. So this was a study that was recently published in Nature Medicine,
Okay.
and they found that in rodents, a high protein intake, and well, what they actually saw was beyond 22% of total calories, posed some cardiovascular risks in terms of plaque formation
Yeah.
in rodents.
Mhm.
Well,
Was
you
it
know
male
what?
or female mice? Does it matter?
Oh, I actually don't know. That's a
Okay.
good question. That's a good
I don't know
question.
if that matters. Does gender matter when it comes to like, when they're even studying rodents? Like, did they?
Mm,
What does that not really matter?
generally not.
Mhm.
Generally freaking not. And in humans, there are sex-based differences in substrate utilization, but that stuff evens out anyway. I mean, like
Yeah.
just to give you a quick example, women tend to oxidize more fatty acids for fuel
Mm.
during exercise than men do. They just have that tendency. However, women also store fatty acids more efficiently than
Yeah.
men do.
Yeah.
So it all freaking evens out.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So,
So the heart study.
right. This study showed some concern about protein intake in rodents.
Hmm.
Now, here's the issue. The fundamental issue is that macronutrient metabolism in rodents is different from humans.
Hmm.
Everything from protein metabolism to carb metabolism to fat metabolism is different in rodents than in humans. And just give you an example, there's a research study where mice were put on a zero carb diet. All kinds of terrible metabolic dysregulation happened. They gained ectopic fat, visceral fat. Their insulin sensitivity went down, glucose control went down, everything just went totally out of whack. And there was another study, I believe it was in rats, where they put rats on a ketogenic diet. Same stuff. They gained non-alcoholic fatty liver. They had this odd accumulation of body fat in the visceral space, and all kinds of things happen in the rodent models with carbohydrate restriction that doesn't happen in humans. And that's because that even at the level of at the cellular level, the liver X receptors within rodents have very different behavior compared to when you look at hepatic metabolism in humans. Um, that is a very jargony way of saying that our physiology as humans is fundamentally different from rodents. Rodents
Yeah.
are just kind of a convenience species to test out things that might by chance happen in humans, but only in the minority of times that it does happen. Like even when you test out a new drug, Well, the statistic on that is something like for every 1,000 drugs that are tested in rodents, only one of those or less makes it to clinical trials in humans. And that's because of these fundamental differences in rodent physiology versus human physiology. Okay, so that's one piece of the thing. That's the fundamental piece. And then we kind of look at the bottom line. When we compare what happened in these rodents with respect to plaque formation and protein intake, we have to ask, okay, does that possibly happen in humans? Let's look at the human research, and lo and behold, the exact opposite happens. So in studies that compare higher protein intakes versus lower protein intakes, and I'm not cherry picking any studies, we're talking about multiple systematic reviews and meta-analyses that pull together the data from multiple studies. So you're really looking at the weight of the evidence here. Higher protein intakes almost always result in more favorable clinical outcomes than lower protein intakes with respect to cardiovascular disease outcomes and parameters related to cardiovascular disease. So like if you were to look at this sort of spectrum of effects that you can study as a result of protein intake and cardiovascular disease, you can look at intermediate endpoints like changes in blood lipids, changes in glucose control, changes in blood biomarkers of health. So like intermediate endpoints are they're indicators of a trajectory either towards disease or away from disease. Okay, so they're indicators. Those are intermediate endpoints, blood biomarkers of health. And then you can also look at hard endpoints, so-called hard endpoints or concrete endpoints like actual cardiac events, mortality, disease, death. You look at those hard endpoints. So everything from the intermediate endpoints to the hard endpoints are more favorable with higher protein intakes versus lower protein intakes in humans. So you're seeing a completely opposite scenario happen with higher versus lower protein intakes in humans versus what happened in this one rodent study.
Yeah.
So you have to go with basic reason,
Yeah.
basic freaking sense, and also you have to go with the human evidence on issues like this.
Yeah.
So,
But it's things
yeah,
like that people latch on to, right? I don't know if it's just because it's new or because they want things to be proven wrong, or maybe they feel like they're doing something wrong. I feel like people just latch on to things like that uh, and say, like, see, I told you all that protein's bad. And then, and there, of course, nobody wants to raise their risk for cardiovascular disease. Um,
yeah.
so I think they latch on to that kind of thing.
And and people have different biases. Like if somebody doesn't particularly like eating protein foods, or let's say
Yeah,
somebody's dietary ideology defaults them to having a hard time getting protein in, then
sure.
they're going to gravitate towards, oh yeah, that's a
Yeah.
convenient finding. I'll just eat a low protein diet and live forever. No, that's a big hell no, because we haven't seen that
Yeah.
at observationally or experimentally at all in human studies. And not only that, another thing I want to add is that food source matters. If you eat a high protein diet that's mostly spam and lard,
Bologna.
it's like, yeah, bologna. If you eat food source absolutely matters. You can
Yeah,
compare something like bologna with something like fatty fish. You're going to get
salmon.
completely different
Yeah,
cardiovascular results. So even at the level of food selection, then you have to cast off that principle that, oh, protein inherently is going to pose some sort of cardiovascular risk. It
yeah,
depends. Yeah.
yeah. No, that's true. Um, and that's, I think, probably the hang up with a lot of like carnivore, right? Because people want to say, "Oh, I like to eat meat. That's all I'm going to eat." Like I read somewhere that says that's the best thing to do.
Oh
So
my
there's
God.
a big bias to it, a personal bias.
The carnivore diet, so popular, such a trend. It's so popular because it has really dramatically favorable short-term results.
Sure. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
initial results. If you were to switch from a YOLO Western diet
Hmm.
where you're eating IHOP for breakfast, McDonald's for lunch, and Panda Express for dinner, then you
And
switch
then,
over to the carnivore diet, you're eating 1,000 calories less per day. You're finally eating enough protein,
yeah,
and you've cut out a bunch of this junk from your diet. Of course, good things are going to happen.
sodium
But
and all that stuff. Yeah. And you're
yeah,
going to get results for sure. But the long term actual reality is that
yeah,
we need
yeah,
all of the nutrition and food groups, as you
yeah.
said, from whole foods
It's
mostly.
it matters, man. It totally, like, long-term health is a different beast than losing 25 to 50 pounds.
Yeah, yeah, and I think, I obviously the attention span is short, so we're having a shorter episode, but also, there's just so much information, and so many quick fixes, that are promised because it sells. I mean, it sells over and over again, and I don't really see it as better than it used to be. I think
Mm,
it's more in our face, and it makes people really question what they're doing. Even if they are on the proper path, they think that this might be better because it might be faster.
right,
When
right.
kind of what you're saying is long-term longevity, your health span is worth the consistent effort.
Yeah, dude,
Hmm.
there's so many ways to lose a significant amount of body weight,
Hmm.
but they're not all equal in terms of long-term health span outlook.
Yeah.
And if you do, let's say you are carrying an extra 25 to 50 pounds.
Mhm.
If you drop that and you needed to drop that to arrive at a favorable body composition, then whatever diet you you use to achieve that, okay, that's great, because just losing that body fat and arriving at a healthy body fat percentage in and of itself is going to improve a full range of health parameters, and it's going to improve your health trajectory.
Yes.
But if you did that strictly just eating fatty steaks,
Atkins all over
that's
again.
that's not the optimal way to do it, and that's just simply not an optimal lifestyle. Now, a lot of people will claim, "This is the only way I can eat. Just beef and salt, that's it."
Oh, gross. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And they'll claim that, if I eat a vegetable, it'll attack me. It'll just,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and maybe there's, like you said, there's a lot of things that can be going on with health conditions, your current state
yeah,
of health, your personal bias, convenience for people, with the preparation of food and, things that they don't have to do. So there's so many things, but the basis is that you should look out for your long-term overall health. And I think I like what you said, that under this umbrella that if you have a significant amount of weight to lose, the first line is to lose the weight because you will start to feel better. But you have to kind of look at it at a lifetime thing. Like, am I going to sustain some of these things? Is this good for my health overall? Um,
mhm.
and I think that kind of can even lead us into the next question I really wanted to ask you about. Was something you mentioned, was collateral fattening. And I wanted you to talk
Yeah,
about that,
yeah,
because I've heard you say that, and I had a couple of questions about that. Like, what is it, and how can we improve our chances of gaining less fat? That was one of the questions. Like, what is
sure, sure.
collateral
Okay.
fattening, and then how can we improve our chances of gaining less fat?
Okay. So the general population wide statistic of succeeding long term in losing 10% or more of your starting body weight is about 20%. So 80% of people who try to diet, who try to
Mhm.
lose excess body weight, they fail. And
Yeah,
that's a really depressing statistic.
that's a big number. Yeah.
And one of the big reasons for that is because people diet wrong.
Okay.
They don't pick a sustainable protocol.
Mhm.
And B, they lose an excessive amount of lean body mass in the process of losing fat. And so this sets them up for the, in quotes, collateral fattening phenomenon, where people end up yo-yo dieting. And the way that it happens is when you lose lean body mass as you're losing body fat, and sometimes a certain amount of lean body mass is inevitable to lose if you're overweight enough. But
Yeah.
you lose an excessive amount of lean body mass by the end of the dieting cycle, then you have to think about it like this. Your body's main goal physiologically, its homeostatic drive is to survive. Okay, your body's strongest goal, survive.
Mhm.
So when you lose metabolically active tissue, your lean body mass,
Yeah.
then
Which
the
is what we
body
want. That's
senses
muscle, you guys. That's muscle. We want to keep the
muscle.
muscle is
Yes,
what I'm saying.
when you lose muscle, then your body goes, oh my goodness, we are now facing a survival crisis. So there's an
Mhm.
energy crisis going on. We're losing vital resources here.
Mhm.
So therefore, what the body does at the end of the dieting cycle, it ramps up your hunger hormones and suppresses your satiety hormones. And then you just kind of have a much more raging appetite on a chronic basis compared to if you were to retain your lean body mass and prevent the body from sensing this sort of energy slash survival crisis at the end of the dieting cycle. And so what happens is if you lose a lot of lean body mass, your body, it has this strong drive to gain that lean mass back. And it
Okay.
does this with your newly minted raging appetite. And then you end up eating back that body weight because your body is driven to sort of get its lean mass back. And in the process that you have this high hunger drive, you're gaining the lean mass back, but you're also overeating, and thus you're gaining a bunch of body fat back, and sometimes even more body fat than you started off with.
Yeah. So
So
that's kind of what collateral
yeah,
fattening is. That's what you're
that's the
saying.
collateral damage, the collateral
Mhm.
fattening
Yeah.
that happens. And that sort of describes the yo-yo dieting cycle. And then the way to prevent that
Mhm.
is to do what it takes to keep your lean body mass while you're losing body fat.
Mhm.
And that is an art and a science in and of itself. And that's why you and I exist as practitioners, because we teach people how do
Mhm.
you keep your muscle while losing fat.
Yeah.
And the essence of that, it's more complicated than this, but like the main thing, the main elements to doing that are to not lose body weight too quickly. So in
Mhm.
other words, don't diet overly aggressively.
Yeah.
Keep your total body weight losses to a limit, roughly a limit. And this is going to vary with the individual. Some people will lose it faster, some people will lose it slower, but you generally don't want to lose more than 1% of your body weight per week if
That
you
was
want to
another
prevent
question.
lean body mass losses.
You're answering questions as we go. So that was another question. How much weight should we look to lose um that can be
Yeah.
sustainable?
Mhm.
1% per week.
Yeah, that would be the limit. And you know
Mhm.
what? 0.5% of a week is just freaking fine, honestly.
And
It's
that's
just fine.
protecting your muscle, your lean body mass
Mhm.
through a slight caloric deficit with whole
Yeah.
foods and continuing to resistance train throughout the process.
Yes, that's
Mhm.
kind of the formula.
Yeah.
Resistance training,
Mhm.
making sure you're not dieting too aggressively,
Mhm.
and then maybe the third element would be nutrition with a focus on getting enough protein
Yeah.
per day. So
Yeah.
those are the three elements, big elements that you would
And
want to
then
focus
what's
on
the
to
protein
prevent that.
again? Even though we know, but just so you can say it
Oh
again,
yeah,
what's the
sure.
recommended protein that
Sure.
somebody should aim for to prevent the things we
Mhm.
don't want?
The weight of the evidence in the research points to about double the RDA. So that would be 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight or zero point 0.7 grams per pound of body weight. And I like to use target body weight because some people are in a state of overweight or a state of obesity
Yeah.
to where if they base their protein targets on current body weight, they'd be
Oh,
just
sure.
over prescribing it to
Yeah.
themselves.
So
So
your target body weight. Would you
mhm,
say to go, let's say somebody has a significant amount of weight to lose, 50, 100 pounds or something like that. And would you say to go like in stages, say to have their target body weight, 30 pounds less, and then once they hit that, and then reevaluate, and then go another 10 pounds from there? Or would you just do the massive drop for their target body weight? Would you start with the goal body weight that they think they want to be at? Because sometimes that changes along the way. Or would you take it down in increments?
it kind of depends on the severity of the situation. I mostly default to just going for the target because
Right, for their target. Okay.
it's hard, it's tough anyway. With protein intake, I found that most people who are overweight or obese,
Hmm.
they're already undershooting their protein intake habitually anyway.
Okay.
It's usually a challenge to get people to raise their freaking protein intake to kind of a
Yeah.
decent minimum.
Yeah, yeah. No, it is.
Anyway,
I noticed
yeah.
that too. And I think you and I kind of live in that small percentage of where we
Mhm.
have looked very protein forward, but it's something new and challenging for people to get to that, to understand, how to incorporate the protein in there for sure. Um,
Yep.
and one thing you love that I love, that science backs, is that protein shakes are a good source to get your protein in, and that's not really a big issue when it comes to getting your protein, even though it's highly processed. um, it's still a source of protein that can be quality and useful.
Absolutely.
They
And
don't
that is a really important point. That
want
is a super important point because there's a narrative being circulated on social media that protein powder isn't real food.
to-
That really annoys me because it's
yeah.
A, it's not true, and B, it doesn't make any sense, and C, it's just not true.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I mean, for me, I have such a sweet tooth and I
Yeah.
like my coffee drinks. And I mean, right now I'm sipping on my protein with coffee, and there's matcha in there, and I can put all my stuff in there. And I know I'm going to get
Yeah.
40 grams of protein over the course
Mhm.
of an hour. Um, you
And you're
know,
winning at life. You win at life. So just
and it tastes delicious.
do what the winners are doing, all right?
and and so I mean, I love that does support that too. It's okay to have like your protein shake. Um,
Yeah.
And one more question about the collateral fattening. So I come from a competitive bodybuilding background, as you know, a little bit. And what I
Yeah.
found happen to myself and other people that I've seen kind of step off stage, and either they decided to stop competing or they couldn't compete any longer. And I was injured. So I think this happens maybe even to athletes alone. Like, I was used to eating so many calories because I was so active and I had so much muscle. When I had to stop, and I see this again with friends and other athletes, that your appetite's still there and you're still used to eating all of those calories.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I gained a lot of fat afterwards because I had no direction. I didn't know what was happening. And I was injured. And I guess that was another question that was on here. Like, if somebody's injured and they're used to eating all of this protein, they're used to eating all of these calories, and they don't want to lose muscle mass, what's the best line of defense when it comes to that? Like, if you have to stop your activity so much because you've been injured or something happens, how do you kind of eat enough to keep some lean mass but not gain a lot of fat?
There's almost there's nothing you can do to
Yeah.
prevent the some uh, I hate to put it this way, but some recomposition in the wrong direction.
Yeah, it was in the
when you
wrong
when you're
direction for
injured.
sure, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
when you're injured, you have to accept the fact that you're gonna lose some muscle, you're gonna gain some fat because your activity level is gonna be down. And the best way, really the only way you can mitigate that is to try to increase the agents of satiety in your diet. So try to keep your protein at least at 0.7 grams per pound of ideal or target weight,
mhm,
and keep your fiber up.
yeah,
So what I mean by that is try to get in at least 20, 30 grams of fiber a day.
yeah,
And that's going to come from gravitating towards foods that are just not highly refined and processed. And like you mentioned, protein powder, even though it's highly refined and processed, it delivers favorable results to health and body composition consistently
yeah,
in the literature, because it's just a part of it's a food stuff. You
yeah,
know, you're basically you're taking the most nutrient dense part out of dairy, for example, and you're making a powder out of it. That's all protein powder is.
yeah, yeah.
And so yeah, you can use that, but the main things: keep your protein up, keep your fiber up, and
Control
just
your
accept.
calories.
Do what it takes to
Mhm,
control the calories, and accept your fate that you're going to be gaining a little bit of body fat and losing a little bit of muscle. But to minimize that, just do those things.
yeah, yeah, and that leads to another question was the protein sources. So I've heard you talk about that a lot.
Yeah.
Is it better to kind of um, have, I guess a diet variation, but more like a protein variation, like in your overall lifestyle? Like, should you aim for different sources and different kinds of protein, or is it better just to kind of stick with one? Like, I guess
Okay.
animal-based, plant-based, that kind of thing. I guess that's kind of what I'm asking.
It's actually ideal to have a variety,
Mhm,
and that is for a couple different reasons. Reason number one: every food species has its own unique nutritional profile and nutritional benefit.
mhm,
So with something like whey protein, you're going to be getting a set of compounds that are beneficial to health that are absent in, let's say, chicken.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And now with chicken, you're going to be getting unique nutrition compared to some other protein source.
mhm,
So, just as a general principle, if you can eat, I want to say in the course of a week, at least 2 to 3 different protein sources, then
yeah,
you'll be doing a lot better in terms of covering or optimizing or maximizing your spectrum of nutrient intake than somebody who just eats beef, period.
yeah,
That's it.
yeah,
You're just going
yeah,
to be getting a wider spectrum of beneficial compounds and even essential nutrients than you would if you had this low variety diet. Um,
so you don't have to
so,
really
with
overthink
that
it too much.
said,
I just said, so you don't really have
you don't
to
have to
overthink
overthink it.
yeah, mhm. With that
Yeah,
said,
you
yeah.
don't have to overthink it. What I do for myself, I do my best to have honestly like the widest variety of sources I can within reason across the week.
Mhm,
So my protein sources will range like either through the day or through the week. I'm having poultry, fish, beef, eggs, dairy, protein powder.
yeah,
I mean, I'm having all those things through the course of the week, and
and
it
you
is
don't
a
have to think
glorious
about it
thing.
so much because you're getting all the variety, so your body
I
just kinda doing its thing that it's supposed
Yeah,
to do and take all the nutrients
yeah,
as it's supposed to without thinking about it too much.
that's right.
Mhm,
I'm getting protein from legumes. I'm getting
mhm,
protein from any number of the starchy vegetables.
yeah,
Um, I'm even getting protein. Married a Korean girl. I'm getting protein from tofu sometimes, man. You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
so
let's talk about that really quick before we have to get off. We had some questions about like the soy. That was always a question. Yeah, like you said, we're gonna have to do another episode here.
We'll have to do
Was
like 10 more, 10
yes, like
more within
we're
the
gonna
next
do like
month.
a monthly one.
Yeah, just don't stand me up.
Yeah, I'll try not to. I'm so sorry. I'm so busy. That's a joke, you guys. So was the soy. So is soy good? Is it bad? Is it okay to have? Um, you can go ahead and answer that.
Yeah. Soy is okay. The short answer is soy is good.
Soy is
And
good.
I
What
know
form of
that,
soy?
right. Okay, so there are some pitfalls to soy. Like if you were to consume your soy as 100% soy protein isolate, or if you were to just chug liters of soy milk a day, probably not a good idea.
Mhm.
I just recently collaborated on a systematic review on soy protein supplementation. So it's a full text read. It's like 6,000 words of pain and suffering if you want to read it. Well, maybe not 6, maybe like 4,000 words of pain. But what we found was that soy is just good.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
So
just
so
it's just good. These rumors about soy having feminizing effects really only happened in soy intakes that were 10 times the norm.
okay.
Isoflavone intakes that were 10 times the norm. So I think as a general guideline, if you cut your soy protein intake off at like, I want to say 50 to 60 grams a day at max, you're not going to incur any of these theoretical negative hormonal effects that have been seen in a couple obscure case studies.
Right. Right. And
But
so
soy protein is a high quality source of protein.
so like
And
tofu,
it has tofu, even
tempeh,
so, yeah,
that
tofu, tempeh, edamame,
mhm.
those soybeans.
I love edamame. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's
Yeah.
like all of that stuff
They're
is
tasty little
healthy and
snacks
good.
in little pods. Yeah.
Yeah, so you don't need to be afraid of soy. If you want to be
Okay.
cautious about it, then cut your intake off at 50 to 60 grams of protein from soy. And frankly, most people don't even hit that unless you're just
Yeah.
obsessed with soy and you're a vegan.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really great information.
Mhm.
The last thing I want to get to today is I had a whole list. I'm just going to put these on to the next one. The
Yeah.
last thing I want to get to today was the visceral fat. So we talk about something. What is it? It's TOFI. Have you heard that acronym? Um,
Uh,
it's
run it by me. Run it by me. What does it
TOFI.
stand for?
TOFI. So we actually talk about this in cardiac rehab because we talk about the BMI, how sometimes the people on the lower end get missed with health conditions. Even though BMI isn't a bad thing, I'm just saying that sometimes people on the lower end get missed because it's thin on the outside, fat on the inside. TOFI. Look it up. It's actually a thing. TOFI.
Mm.
So
Mhm,
it's visceral fat.
mhm,
So somebody was asking about that, about the visceral fat and what is the best way. So somebody can appear thin and they have this visceral fat. Are you comfortable, like confident talking about like what the visceral fat is and kind of how to get rid of it, and maybe help people understand that just because you might appear thin, you still should be resistance training. Um,
mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, that kind of has a simple answer,
Mhm.
and the simple answer is there's no specific or special protocol for reducing visceral fat
Okay.
that's different from the normal healthy training and eating guidelines.
Okay. Yeah.
There's no
Makes
special
sense.
protocol for that. It's worth mentioning that individuals have differing predispositions for accumulating visceral fat. So
Mhm.
that is a genetics thing.
Does
Um,
age and hormones have to do with anything with that? With
yeah,
okay.
yeah. It does. As people get older, then they have a greater propensity to store fat ectopically or in the wrong places. Age is generally biological age is generally a bad thing.
The only
Chronological age.
non-modifiable risk factor.
You stopped aging at 27, so you're lucky.
Yeah. I
But
just keep repeating it. I'm trying to turn back the clock. My body would say something different, but that's okay. We're working on it, right? Paving
that's
the
all
way.
right. That's fine. So yeah, visceral fat, that is an interesting freaking thing. Like dietary habits also can affect visceral fat accumulation.
Okay.
The
That's where the
quality of
whole
the
foods come
diet.
in. The whole foods come in. You were talking about like make sure your choices are mostly good.
Yep.
We all again know what whole foods are. If you want to know some of the terms, I'm going to plug
Yes.
your book again. The flexible diet. It really is. It's a great book to have. It breaks down. It's got a little bit of humor in there, and it breaks down a lot of the buzzwords you might hear.
I appreciate that you like that big brick of a book. Um, so I wanted to mention that visceral fat reduction
Hmm.
has everything to do with losing overall body fat.
Okay.
So you can't necessarily target visceral fat with a special protocol. Um, but however, and I'm talking like just looking at the bulk of the research, comparing different macronutrient distributions, how they affect visceral fat, it comes down more to a diet quality thing rather than a macronutrient composition thing.
Yeah.
So they actually compared overfeeding conditions on visceral fat accumulation in this one study. Um, Rosquist was the lead author, and they compared an overfeeding protocol that involved saturated fats versus polyunsaturated fats. And the overfeeding of saturated fats resulted in more visceral fat accumulation than with the polyunsaturated fats.
Okay.
But that kind of goes back to what we know about dietary fats and health.
Yeah.
A lot of people try to push back against the old guidelines of keeping saturated fats moderated or eaten judiciously. They try,
Yeah.
a lot of people try to be contrarian and think they discovered something special and saying, "Yeah, I'm going to slam the butter because butter. I read it from this guru online that is good. Eat a
Butter in
stick
your
of butter with
coffee.
every put
Butter
butter
on
in my coffee,
everything.
butter everywhere."
It's so
That's a
gross.
bunch of silly stuff, and people get wooed by these really odd things, and that can compromise your efforts in reducing or mitigating gains in visceral fat.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah. Yeah.
buttering everything and you're cooking everything with beef tallow and lard. That's a good way to gain visceral fat. Um,
So if you want to
so
gain visceral fat,
so yeah,
eat butter and lard.
hopefully I answered that
Yeah.
question
No, you did. So
fairly.
the visceral fat is you cannot really target visceral fat. It's just an overall, again, healthy lifestyle. If you're thin, you
Mhm.
should still be resistance training and eating well because you still can have that visceral fat. Um, and there's still a lot of health conditions that aren't good with that, even if you're at a thin size. So you should overall
You reminded me of something I need to say about visceral fat.
Mhm,
So, okay, a lot of people who don't like to exercise
mhm.
will say that exercise isn't good for weight loss. Look
Yeah,
at the
yeah,
studies on exercise's effect on what it does. It's not good for weight loss. Okay, that's true if you don't have a handle on dietary factors,
yeah.
because in some people, you put them on an exercise program, then their body weight won't change much. But
Mhm.
guess what? Their body composition almost always changes for the
Yes.
better. And exercise itself, without changing anything in the diet, has an inherently beneficial effect on lowering visceral fat.
Yeah, yeah. And
So
it's
yeah,
good for
that's
your
that's something I
brain.
wanted to. Good for your
Exercise
brain.
is good for your brain. Yes.
Absolutely. It
And
raises
your
something
mood.
called BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor, and you're not going to get a lot of that with sitting around. It happens with exercise. So it's good for your brain and it's good for your body.
I'm constantly chasing that then because I
Yeah, you're chasing BDNF.
yes. All right, so I'm going to wrap this up because we went an hour, but that's actually really good because again, I have a whole much more list to ask and conversations to go on, so we'll have to do it again.
We'll do it again. We'll do it again.
Yeah, but overall, I think the message today was to make sure you know where your studies are coming from. If you're not really good at reading the studies, make sure that you kind of understand the source. And you can always, go to Alan's page and check it out because you're usually pretty good about being on top of debunking some of the dangerous ones, the dangerous headlines. And I feel like another kind of message that we got today was if it seems like it's off, then it usually probably is. Like putting butter in your coffee doesn't make sense. Overall health for your overall health. Like if it seems too good to be true, maybe we should probably look deeper into that.
Can I say a little something about
Yeah.
buttering your coffee?
Hmm.
There was a study that compared the effects of cream
Hmm.
versus butter
Hmm.
on blood lipid profile.
Okay.
So cream actually had neutral effects on blood lipids. It didn't affect your blood lipids.
Nice.
Whereas butter increased the atherogenic subfraction. So it increased apolipoprotein B.
Which is
And I
bad.
believe it raised LDL as well. So
Yeah.
butter had an unfavorable cardiovascular risk um, result
Yes.
compared to cream.
Wow. Yeah.
So, I mean, imagine that. You can just stick to your cream
It's
and
a
be
lot
better
better
off.
tasting. It's delicious. Yeah.
Well, cream has something in it called milk fat globule membranes that are
Hmm.
intact. MFGM is intact in cream. And
Hmm.
what happens when you take cream and you churn it into butter, you churn out these milk fat globule membranes that actually have cardioprotective qualities and that
Oh, wow.
actually make the effects of cream intake biologically neutral.
Wow.
So you're taking a substance and you're kind of raising its risk profile by turning it into butter. Now, look, I'm not anti-butter. You can
Yeah, I
live
was
a
just gonna
life.
say that. Like, you can use butter, but just
You
don't
can use
overdo
butter.
it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, you can totally live as long as anybody and as happily as anybody with butter consumption, but don't eat sticks of it and don't think it's an actual health food.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, you don't even wanna over-exercise. We certainly don't wanna overeat butter. So I
Great
think
point.
that's
Great
good
point.
driving home,
Mhm.
information there, and even if you're skinny, you can still have visceral fat. So the bottom line, make sure you exercise, make sure you work out, and the overall message should be whole food, mostly nutrition, whole food nutrition, exercise, and and don't fall for the red flag stuff. Right? That's a good sum
Yep.
of kind of what we talked about.
Absolutely.
And soy is good, and soy is good. It is
Absolutely.
okay as long as you are not drinking
Yeah.
85
Don't
protein
don't be
shakes
afraid of
made of
soy.
soy a day. Mhm.
That's
All right,
right.
well,
That's
what's
right.
that?
We did that systematic review and I was like, "Oh no, we can't use the word soy boy anymore because it's not true."
That's definitely a gym bro thing too. I'm sure that's probably not going to go away, but still, you can actually eat soy. There's benefits to it. So, well, thank you so much, Alan. Is there anything else you want to say today before we go?
Follow Pam Greshock. Join her group. Patronize Pam. That's what I want to say. Just straight
No,
patronize the woman.
we appreciate you so much and all of your research and hard work. We know that you're constantly working behind the scenes, trying to help spread the message of health and fitness in the proper way and fight the good fight. So hopefully more and more people will start to, see the truth. So we appreciate you. Thank you so much. And I will have you back on again.
Awesome. Thank you so much,
All right.
Pam.